Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. My guest today is Dr. Christine Janssen, founder and CEO of Edstutia, an award-winning immersive learning platform that leverages the power of virtual reality and AI for adult learning. Christine is no one who is a stranger to higher ed. She was a clinical associate professor and director of entrepreneurship for 12 years at Fordham University in New York City, and her PhD is from the New York University, so well-grounded in higher ed. Chris is an entrepreneur through and through, and she approaches change management in a way that shows both her higher ed background and her entrepreneur background. She's written a great book we'll talk a little bit about on the podcast, but she's here to talk about change management and how higher ed can and need to change to make it more relevant for students and for employers. Chris, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Drumm. This is going to be fun.
I am looking forward to it as well. I think we're going to have a great conversation. You do change management for your business as part of, I think you pronounce it Edstutia. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We'll get into what Edstutia does as well. When we spoke last week, you were blowing me away with some of the things you said. And so I'm really excited about this. Before we get into the meat of this, please tell the listeners a little bit about your background, if you would.
Sure. Okay, so currently I am the CEO of an immersive learning company called Edstutia, which I founded, actually officially it will be 5 years in the next couple of weeks. Thank you. And what we have done is we built an entire platform in virtual reality, also integrated AI, and this is completely for adult learning, which to me straddles higher ed and into workplace learning. And we specialize in business and leadership skills, communication, soft skills. So that's been my what I eat about and think about and dream about and sleep about for the last 5-6 years. And prior to that, I was a business school professor here in New York. I live in New York. And I was a professor at Fordham University for 12 years, as well as the director of entrepreneurship. And I bring that up because that's how my mind thinks, always looking for that big, hairy problem. And there are a lot of them around us.
And really?
Yeah.
Problems in higher ed? You're kidding me.
Yeah. But it was after being a student for so long and then being in higher ed, I'm all about the future of learning and the possibilities. And that is the fire in my belly. And so that's what led me to leave higher ed to build Edstutia, because I wanted a bigger reach, deeper reach, wider reach to impact what learning can be, especially with integrating emerging technologies. So that's a little bit what I've been doing the last few years, and then also in higher ed and in my free time.
Yeah. So thank you. That's good. When we spoke a week or so ago, though, what impressed me is what you guys are doing is amazing, especially from learning. But looking at it from a higher level, from a senior leadership perspective, you, especially with your entrepreneurship background, it's about change management. You've got a real specific skill, in fact, we both do, in getting people to change how they think, how they do things. And that is truly one of, if not the most important leadership skill that we need in higher ed with all the challenges that are going on.
Yeah. And higher ed in general needs to change just fundamentally, because it really hasn't changed much in decades because of the system.
No, not decades, centuries. When you stop and think about it, online education is the major shift that we have done in the past 10, 20, 30 years. But up to that, and even still now, in many respects, it's still the sage on the stage.
Yes. And while online learning can be, it's very convenient and efficient, it's really not the end all be all. It is not the silver bullet. It is not the best way to learn. If it's just one way passive interaction, it's not the answer. And there's so much more that higher ed can do to build off of. Face-to-face has its value, online has value, but we have to pay attention to what's happening around us and all the disruption happening around us that requires us as higher ed leaders to change, because our audience, our customers, our students have different needs, as does industry. And if we remain stagnant and the same, we're doing nobody good service. And so that's the fire in my belly.
Well, with that, I couldn't tell.
Yeah.
When I take a look back at the past 10 years, actually, if you want to go back 30 years, online education is a huge transition point. But just recently, we've had, within the last 6 years, we've had 3 major transitions, or if you want to even take it to 10 years. T1 or Trump 1 made major changes. Then there was COVID. Now with Trump 2 funding international students, and then now AI is coming in. These are all major changes, but we're having 3 really at one because we're still seeing the effects of COVID.
Yeah. And it's funny. The one thing I loved about COVID is that it forced us. I was still working in higher ed. It forced us to adapt quickly. And a lot of people didn't like that, but that was a good thing. And we were able to keep the ship moving no matter what, right? Not easy transition. But unfortunately, so many people in higher ed just want to go back to how it was before COVID versus moving forward. That is frustrating as all get up for me. But there was some good in COVID about change, right? And we saw we could do that. So we're still dealing with that. And certainly a lot of the things that the Trump administration has thrown out, and the Department of Ed dismantling and funding and grants and stuff disappearing, and the pressure on higher ed in so many ways, whether it's financially, legally, international students, all that. And so higher ed is facing so much change and pressure right now in every angle. And that's tough to handle. And that's, we'll get into that when it comes to change management. There's so many dimensions to the change right now. And so that's forcing us to look at change and to manage change in a different way. And certainly
it's not checkers anymore. It's 3D chess on steroids.
Totally is. You know what? That reminds me of this story. I saw Jerry Seinfeld at the Beacon Theater a couple of years ago, and he was telling the story about his marriage and, how difficult it can be. And he's like, my marriage is kind of like a chessboard floating on water, and all the pieces are made of smoke. And so I get it. It's not clear to you anymore. You're right. It's not checkers. And yes, it is chess. It's very strategic. This is about managing, strategic change. But, we don't know what's happening next. How do you handle this ambiguity? And that is the other layer that is making it very difficult for people to plan for that change.
Very much so. And when you throw AI in there and that rate of change is increasing exponentially, we need to be more comfortable with change. I remember a quote when I was doing a lot of speaking at conferences talking about change management. Jack Welch, love him or hate him, Jack Welch, he says, when the rate of change outside your organization is faster than the rate of change inside, it's starting to go downhill. And we've got to be able to adapt to these changes because there are changes going on, especially faculty. But the other thing is we've got to prepare students for the unknown. We don't know what the jobs are going to be in 5-10 years.
No, there are lots of predictions and trend reports on what those jobs may be, or, where there's going to be demand. And of course, a lot of it is around AI and emerging tech. But oh my God, that is so true. And this is when I was still teaching at Fordham, I would speak to freshmen coming in, an incoming class first semester, and I would tell them there's a really high likelihood that by the time you graduate in 4 years, you're going to be working at a company that doesn't exist today, or doing a job that hasn't been created yet, or working in an industry that's still developing, or or even solving problems that don't exist today. So how do we prepare students for that? That is mind-boggling. I think very difficult for faculty to wrap their head around because, well, then what the heck am I preparing them for? Right? Mm-hmm. It's more than just subject matter. I think a lot what needs to change in higher ed is preparing students for change, for imminent change, for ambiguity and uncertainty, to be resilient, to be problem solvers and with minimal information and having to do it very quickly. So a lot of that is mindset. In addition to skills, it is having the right mindset and fortitude to handle stuff. And actually to be able to teach students that, I think higher ed and faculty also need to be themselves prepared for that and okay with that before they can teach others. So it's a chessboard.
It's a VUCA world.
Yeah, yes, it is.
So change management, what we're going to talk about for the most part today, this has been a great tee up of the subject. Kotter came out with his 8 steps, which, it was groundbreaking because nobody up to that point had really looked at the change management process. We can walk through those, but I would be willing to bet that 80-90% of the audience already knows what they are. The thing to remember is change is never done and it gets faster. Now you bring in another piece to that, the entrepreneur and business management perspective. Mm-hmm. Integrate that with Kotter.
Yeah, sure. I mean, listen, first of all, Kotter's model is awesome. Whenever I look at that, I was like, yes, the components in it are key and it makes a lot of sense. But let's go back to that example I just shared about the chessboard and the pieces being made of smoke. So you can't just rely on this model. It's almost like we have to look at Kotter's model from a 3D perspective. There's all these different levels and layers. So it really makes it difficult to just use that model. So one of the things that from an entrepreneurship perspective, there's a concept called Agile development. And it's a model as well, and it's a cyclical model. And this comes from the software development industry. And it's, you want to throw something out there, get feedback, test it, try it, experiment, take that feedback and iterate, and you go through it again and again, but you do it very quickly. This is the flywheel, right? And so if we can take that mindset and that process to be able to manage and handle change and much more quickly, that's kind of a little bit of the mindset we need to apply to Kotter. But I think that's a fantastic model. And it enables you to do things super efficiently and be really, when it comes to problem solving or even developing new products and services, managing change, putting plans together. If you can have that mindset and actually being agile, not just talking about it, being agile and having that right mindset, wow, can you get ahead of the game? So go back to what Jack Welch was saying. If the rate of change is faster externally to your institution than internally, we got a problem. So how about trying something such as this flywheel that enables us to move faster? Now, easier said than done, because I know there are certain systems and processes already in higher ed, and that's what we're used to. But because of all these external factors and AI and the pressures, we have to do something different. Okay?
Yes. Absolutely. And you bring up such an interesting point, because when you think about the structures that are in place for shared governance, I was a faculty member, you were a faculty member.
Yeah.
We understand how we as faculty think. We don't like ambiguity. We like things to be solid. We want transparency, but sometimes there can't always be the transparency. It's not because people don't want to share. It's because they just don't know. There's no way of saying this is definitively exactly what it is. And so getting faculty to work on this flywheel and jointly studying things. I mean, I think you referred to it before as quantum thinking principles. It's being able to look at things as they might be, try it, and not be afraid to fail.
Yeah, this is the piece of change management. You know how we learn to, unlearn something, relearn something, refreeze it,
Oh, yes.
and solidify that.
Freeze, unfreeze. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So if people are learning something brand new, it is a little bit easier to adapt because there was nothing for them to reset. But when you're instilling change in something that people have been doing or thinking or acting on and for a long time, that's what makes change so hard. Right? So
absolutely.
Yeah, the quantum thinking principles that I had mentioned when we were chatting before, I just released a book back in June 2025. And in the last chapter of the book, we apply, and it's about changing your mindset about learning. We take quantum physics principles and we apply it to thinking. And so we came up with, a playbook for how can we actually take certain principles such as superposition and being able to have multiple thoughts and beliefs and understanding at the same time, even if they are contradictory. Try to wrap your head around that one, right? Uncertainty in action. How can you actually apply? And it's not just planning and talking. It is applying, executing, and while also being agile and handling that uncertainty. Those are two very different concepts. I've got stability, but I also need to be able to change on the fly. And how do we grasp those concepts? Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of things that and I think it's pretty cool to take something that's so far out there, like quantum physics, but can we drill it down in a way that is applied to how we think? The gist of it is we have to, I'm going to go back to the unfreezing, refreezing. To get people to change behaviors, I believe 100% we have to change our mindsets about things. Because if we're still of the mindset that this is how it goes here, we've always done it like this, and that's the best thing for this industry. That's difficult versus, you know what? We're in a really crazy world that is moving fast. And AI is changing, for example, every aspect of our life, including our jobs and including adult learning. How do we deal with that when we have no idea what it is, how we can apply it, and it's changing and it's evolving so fast. So by the time you integrate something at your university, it's going to take months, right? And get people on board. Then something new is coming out. That's frustrating for a lot of people, but it's also exciting. But that's why you have to kind of reset how you're going to work and think and execute, because it's got to be that shorter flywheel thing. Let's learn, let's experiment, let's iterate, and keeping yourself set up in a way that allows you to continue that change and to adapt.
Yeah, that is so critical. You've got to have multiple things. One of the things that we work on is risk management and helping institutions plan. And the key we found with risk management, with change management, is creating that shared vision with your stakeholders and getting them involved with the process. That's critical to do, but even before you get there, you've got to get them on board with where you're going and make them okay with failure. Everything you try isn't necessarily going to work. But if you keep a strong vision of where you're going, you can get people past that.
Yeah. You know what? It's funny that you mentioned the failure thing, because when I taught entrepreneurship, I would tell my students that's where the growth happens. When you push yourself out there and you try, and you're going to learn from your mistakes. You learn more from your mistakes than your successes because you take the time to think about it. But it's, I'm like, you go home and tell your parents, I just taught you that, how to be a failure. Nobody signs up for that. The parents are like, what? And pay all this money. But there's so much value in that. So, okay, but we've got to try.
If you learn from your mistakes, that's critical. Most people, we're not going to look at what we did, et cetera. But you gave me a couple of really good examples the other day when we were talking about AI and implementation, things along those lines. Because at this point, AI is becoming more and more mainstream. Higher ed is starting to adapt. I mean, faculty freaked out when it first came out because students are cheating, et cetera. I remember one project I was doing, and we were struggling over creating strategies for a strategic plan. And I went into AI and used that and it created exactly what we were looking for. and I gave it to the faculty administration. They said, you can't use that. You're plagiarizing. It's like,
yeah.
So, but you've got some great examples of AI and how to get people past this concerns about various things.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go back to higher ed freaking out about students using AI. So first of all, that is never going away. The box has been opened. Okay. And so if there's a faster way of doing something, good on you, students, for finding a more efficient way to get an answer. Because if we were in the workplace, that would be what you would do. How do I find the best answer as quickly as possible, right? Although in higher ed, I get it. It's the situation is different. We want to ensure that they're actually learning something. But I got two things to say about this. One is faculty are using AI too. They're using it to put quick curriculum together or give me an assignment because they weren't prepared, or maybe they want to try something different new. So they're using it just as well because it's fast, it's convenient, it's efficient. Got it. So there's a double-edged sword here.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right with that. But if you're sitting there, and I'm going to go to levels of learning, if you're at level 1, knowledge and understanding, that's one thing. But if you're trying to teach people to analyze, to use critical thinking, there's nothing wrong with AI and then making somebody go in and analyze what's true, what isn't true. How do you know that? Those are those second and third level skills that employers want to see versus just knowledge, because knowledge is fungible.
Yeah. Yeah. What is really important is the practical application piece. Knowledge gain is one thing, and you can use AI for that. You can use AI to aggregate content. Great. That's really quick and efficient. But here's the thing. AI doesn't learn for you. You still need to learn. You still need to process that information and make sense of it or come up with some answers to things. If you don't understand that yourself as a student, that's where the problems can happen. But this is what I'm going to say to faculty. Because that information is available at the students' fingertips and they'll continue using it, what that's going to do is require us to teach in a different way and to do assessment in different ways. Right?
Yeah. Which gets into the change management aspect of unlearning what you've already been doing for so long, relearning a new way, and then refreezing with this new way.
Because you're probably going to have to adopt that again in the very near future.
Exactly. Right? There was a great example that we were talking about learning from your mistakes and learning from different things. End of course evaluations, which are usually pretty useless. Do we ask the right questions? Did you like your professor? No, who cares whether you liked your professor or not? What did you learn from the course? That's another change thing.
Yeah, for sure. That's really funny. Those are like the teacher evaluations at the end of a semester. The students are required to do that. And I always laughed at that because it's like there wasn't anything. They would ask, how much time did you spend studying for this class? What grade do you expect? Was your professor prepared? La, la, la. But there were never any questions around, did you learn? What did you learn that's applicable and relevant? Like nothing around that. So it's like, what are we asking them for? Why are we doing that? But from the perspective of, forget teacher evaluation, think about the student, the assessments, how we're assessing whether or not they learn. We have become so programmed to read this, listen to a lecture, take this exam or quiz, whatever. Here's your grade, move on. And because that's what students are, all they care about is getting that piece of paper after 4 years. And what gets them that piece of paper is passing and getting A's, getting good grades, keep my GPA. So they don't care if they learned or not, and they will do whatever they need to do to get an A to ensure they get that piece of paper at the end. And I swear there's some students that could get through those 4 years, graduate, have that diploma, and didn't learn a whole hell of a lot. And we're not even assessing those things. Sometimes I can't make a blanket statement for every university or every professor there, because there's some people that are doing a rock star job. But if we're going to continue to keep, go buy an expensive textbook, oh Lord, that's already outdated by the time you get to class. And having a passive learning environment where the professor, the sage on the stage, and you just sit there and listen, maybe have a little discussion and memorize stuff for an exam. So, I'm a huge fan of experiential learning, and that stuff does not work for me. But when you say you still want to give a student a take-home essay project, well, of course they're going to go use AI. Of course they are. And so then that creates problems, and you're all freaked out. Oh, they need to learn how to write, blah, blah, blah. Yes, they do. But then you come up with a better assignment, a different way of delivering that or assessing their skills rather than that take-home essay. Okay, that's going to require you to teach differently and to assess differently. It's really not the end of the world, but it is. The whole experience in higher ed is changing. And I know that's how you and I, Drumm, when we went to college, that's what we did. That's how it went, but it doesn't work anymore.
So from the change management perspective, we talked about shared vision and how critical that is. And there's two parts. Where you're going, what you want to do generally doesn't change. The how you get there is what changes. The other piece with that is getting your key stakeholders on board, and in a shared governance environment, it's critical to have faculty on board. We talked a lot about examples about how faculty are having to change their teaching from AI. But the students are also key stakeholders, and they expect us to lead and to teach them. The one thing, and this is where your entrepreneurship comes into play. In business, you're listening to your customers. Are we listening to our customers? I mean, AAC&U just came out with a wonderful survey that says employers are very happy with higher ed, but we need to make some changes. Are we listening to the employers of our graduates to find out what they need? Are we listening to students on how they want to learn?
No, we're not. And this is why we have a skills gap. And there are plenty of employers that aren't happy with higher ed, which is why they no longer require a college degree to apply for a job. This is a trend that we're seeing going on because they're realizing there's a lot of great skilled people out there that didn't get a college degree or no longer does that degree, depending on what people studied and major in. That doesn't necessarily mean they're prepared. There is such a disconnect. That is another thing that I have in the book as well. And it's really sad because you were so right that take any other industry. I don't care if we're talking about shampoo, furniture, cars, accounting services. If you don't listen to your customers and what they need and give them what they want, then they start looking elsewhere, which is what the students have been doing is I'll just go to a boot camp and I'll learn how to code in Python and get myself a rocking job that pays six figures. It's just one of the only industries that just isn't playing that way.
It's too insular.
It is. And the thing is, they have two audiences that they need to serve. They've got employers, okay? Because what's the point of going to college, right? It's to prepare them for careers. But they also have the students and their families. And so this is why you hear two audiences that you have to listen to and give them what they need. And you've got to make sure that that matches. So again, we used to live in a world that, take, Tide detergent. You would see commercials and all they would do is convince you need to buy that detergent. It's not like that anymore. It is a buyer's market. And this is also going to start, it already is, impacting higher ed. Lower enrollment. If you're not going to give me what I need and want and to prepare me for success in my career, why am I coming here and spending bazillions of dollars? Right?
At the same time, I think higher ed needs to be very careful that they don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Agreed.
Okay. Employers, and this is up, I think the number was like 70 or 80%, very much appreciate higher ed or somewhat appreciate. They say the skills that they're being taught are right. They're not teaching everything that they need, but there's not a lot of retraining that has to happen when they get out. So that's a good mark. The thing is everything is changing so quickly. How do you keep up with those changes and make sure that your institution and your faculty are keeping up and teaching the ability to develop new skills as well as the knowledge that's necessary?
Honestly, it keeps coming back to faculty and the culture. Like, are we putting enough money and resources to supporting professional development for our own faculty members? If the students come into college and they know more about technology than the professors do, which has kind of been happening anyway, again, where's that value? And it just, I think the big sticking point is getting faculty to be the ones that are leading the change, that are leading the skills development and preparation for those students. And that is going to change from year to year to year. You can't just dust up your curriculum from last year and teach the same stuff. We just don't live in that world anymore. So again, that rate of change is a big component. And for anybody who's listening to this, who's a faculty member, I get it. Nobody likes to be told how to teach, what to teach. You've got a lot of this academic freedom as to what you want to include in your curriculum and your courses and how you do that. But unfortunately, we are in this time that we have to change for the sake of the students. The students have to be the center of it all. And if we're not giving them what they need, we're just doing a huge disservice. So going back to how do we get faculty on board? I do think that they need to understand why this change, what's in it for them, what happens if they don't change, educate them a little bit more on emerging technology and different mindsets and resilience and comfort with the unknown. That's a lot, and you can't switch overnight. But if you give them agency to be a part of, say, for adopting AI, have them be a part of it, how they want to integrate it. I would never say AI should replace everything that higher ed's doing and face-to-face interactions and the student discussions at all. But you have to look at it as a way to enhance what you're doing and not ignore it. Because you don't want to be the institution that's cranking out graduates that don't know. Oh, I say this a lot too. It's not just learning about AI, it's learning with AI.
Yes. We've got a couple of really good examples of leaders of higher ed institutions who model good change management practices. I know in your book, you interviewed Michael Crow.
I sure did. Actually, in the book, I interviewed 15 people, thought leaders in the space of adult learning, experiential learning, technology, authors, chief learning officers, education professors, etc. And it was an awesome experience. And definitely one of my favorites was President Michael Crow from ASU. He's such a visionary and he makes stuff happen and he puts his money where his mouth is and he carves out so many resources to ensure that his faculty, staff, everybody that's a part of that community they're moving forward. There is nothing stagnant about ASU.
Right. And one of the big things is he makes faculty training a priority.
Yes.
I mean, as we were talking a minute or so ago, what came to mind is, the typical model for faculty going up for tenure is 40% teaching, 40% research, 20% service. I think we're doing a disservice by saying 40% research. Why can't the 40% be research in your particular area on how you can evolve your teaching? It doesn't have to be just research in your subject matter expertise. There's all sorts of different ways to do that. You mentioned another one that we talked about, Michael Baston.
Yes. Another visionary. So Michael Baston is the president of Cuyahoga Community College, which they fondly call Tri-C. And he's another one. I'm like, I should have worked for you. But I don't know a ton about 2-year institutions because I worked in a 4-year institution. And one of the great things about community colleges is they don't have to deal with tenure. So that opens things up a little bit, that the instructors, the faculty there are all about teaching. They are all about the student in the classroom and all that. So that's just a different model, which there's value to research. I can't diss that. That's not what I'm saying, but that shouldn't supersede, if we don't have students, we're not in business, folks, right? Yeah. I have so many great stories. And one thing that stuck in my head is that when he took on this new position, I think it was a year or so ago, he had to put together like this support committee to help him stay in touch with the community, making sure that, he's putting internships and things like that together and really connecting the greater community with the students, because these are non-traditional students who are there, probably have families, and they're there to upskill, to get better jobs, right? It's very different. They're not there to go to football games and go to frat parties. But he said he deliberately put together a committee. He's like, I didn't go and find just faculty members and administrators. I brought people in from outside of the institution because I needed to hear their voices. They needed to be a part of the solution. And I just thought that was brilliant. And I don't see that happening regularly.
No, it isn't. Going back to Cotter, you got first two steps, an urgency for change. You've got to have that. And we certainly have that now. But the second step, putting together your guiding coalition. Higher ed needs to look at the guiding coalition not only as the internal change piece, but the external to find out what do your, quote, customers need. I mean, that's, to me, important. If we keep doing the same thing, it's that definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
Yeah.
We're at a point in the higher ed, we're at a tipping point, and we need to make sure that these things are changing, that they get anchored in the culture, and that we can operate in a VUCA world. VUCA being volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and I forget what the A is, ambiguous, I think.
See, I love that. I love those words. I kind of thrive with disruption and change. I find it very exciting. And I also understand that I'm not normal.
I would never say that to your face. No.
No, but I think that's where the entrepreneurial mindset comes in. It's like, if there's a better option out there, better possibilities, why not change? Why not adapt?
Exactly.
Actually, you know what? I want to share the story that I have in the book as well. I gave the example of the yellow cab industry in New York City. And, they just kind of rested on their laurels. This is what you get. It's expensive. There's mystery fees and charges that show up and very difficult to hail, especially when it's raining or especially when you're trying to get to the airport. I mean, that's what we dealt with for years. Enter Uber. It took an external constituent to drive change in a stale industry. I sit here and look at this. Just think about this from the standpoint of higher ed. Higher ed's the yellow cab. Something else came about because you know what? They listened to all the problems and the challenges and the needs and the demands of customers, of riders, and they gave them what they wanted. Where the yellow cab industry was just like sitting fat and happy and like, well, too bad. What you see is what you get. So you take something like Uber that totally disrupts, and this is what we expect now. I want to know when you're showing up. I can reserve the car. I know how much it is before I get in the cab. There's safety features, all sorts of stuff. And, and then the yellow cab industry is scrambling. We have an app too. They're so behind. Nobody uses them anymore. They just don't. So this is a perfect example. The disruption came from outside the industry, a whole new entity, and it has changed, like obviously for the better, the user experience, but now it's our expectations have changed. This is what we expect from transportation, right? I can just see
exactly
the same thing happening in higher ed. If they don't get on board and drive the change themselves, and they have the opportunity, we all do equally. Every institution, you can make that decision. Actually, I just think one of the worst things that any institution can do right now is not change. It's just sit around, wait and see. Or I hear people within higher ed, well, let's see what other institutions are going to do. Quite frankly, that's not a good strategy, right?
Yeah, we've got to do it. And that is, are you going to be the 800-pound gorilla who dictates things like Michael Crow and ASU? Yeah. Or are you going to be the also ran and you're going to continue to see your enrollments drop? Thank you. 3 takeaways for presidents and boards.
Oh, geez. Drumm, we could sit and talk for hours. This is a really fun and interesting topic. Okay, couple takeaways here. And this is the fire in my belly and kind of the reason I ended up writing my book, because it is all about, we've got to get people first and foremost to change their mindsets. So that's going to be my first takeaway here is let's change how we think about learning and how we think about our industry, about higher ed. Let's be more risk takers. Okay, try, experiment. If you don't even make that effort, you're like, how are you going to instill that change? How are you going to unlearn, right? So it's take some more risks and be comfortable with uncertainty. Be comfortable with ambiguity. And I understand most people don't like that. And it's easier said than done. But we got to start somewhere, right? Let's start taking those steps. And I think overall being comfortable with change, okay? Yep. This is a whole different dynamic to consider when we're talking about change management. How about we be comfortable with it, right? Versus the thing that we either ignore or push away. So change in mindset is one thing. Secondly, without that change in mindset, it's very difficult for people to change their behaviors. Okay. So go back to that change management model. We need to do a better job in serving our students and our other stakeholders. And in order for us to change our systems and processes and how we learn, I'm going to go back to point number one, with changing your mindset. And then rather than fitting students into the existing systems, what if we flip that around and we change our system to fit the demands of students as well as employers, right? Round peg, square hole. Okay, this is all about adapting. And then I think the third thing is really about remaining relevant. Any institution, you need to remain relevant, competitive, desirable. If enrollments are dropping for you, think about why. And if other institutions are being more adaptive, integrating AI, and you're not, you can bet your bottom dollar that students are going to be going to those institutions that are much more cutting edge, right? So you need to remain relevant. And I am of the ilk of, I would rather be the disruptor versus the disrupted. You have a choice, okay?
Yeah.
Get out there and take those chances and risks, or, be the one that gets steamrolled.
That's it. And I will add to that, leadership comes from the top. You've got to be a visionary. You've got to know where it is you need to go. Your vision may not change, but how you get there more than likely will change.
Yeah, that's a good point. And those leaders I mentioned earlier, those are people who they're visionaries and they're great at execution. Yeah, we need more of those in higher ed.
Absolutely. Chris, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. I appreciate you taking some time with me today.
Super fun, Drumm. Let's do it again.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening today, and a special thank you to my guest, Dr. Christine Janssen. Chris, thanks for being on the program. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, especially all the talk about change management, and I look forward to the next time our paths cross. To my listeners, thanks for tuning in. See you next week.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.